Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first large official event of the Comparative and International Education Society Conference, Education Beyond the Human. We are absolutely thrilled to have all of you here. As you enter the room, please introduce yourself and join in listening to our invited panelists and then participate in the discussions that will follow. I wanted to, before we begin, I wanted to say that this meeting is recorded and you can choose to be anonymous when you ask questions at the end of the session. And when you go into the rooms at the end of the session, you can also choose whether you would like to stay anonymous or have your photos, your video and audio recorded. So first of all, once again, thank you very much for joining this session and the conference itself. It has been quite an impromptu event. From the very beginning of planning the conference, the CIES 2020 conference, we actually planned to do a very small virtual conference pilot as a way to move our society into the virtual space, to consider carbon footprint of our professional society, but also to address some of the inequalities related to international travel, and also actually address some of the political challenges that many of our participants face. And very quickly, so this virtual pilot turned into something much larger because of the disruptions that were provoked by the COVID-19 health pandemic. And so now we are kind of very impromptu and spontaneously moving into the virtual space while still exploring all of the same issues that we set for the agenda ourselves. So the idea behind the conference itself is to re-examine the role of education in the climate crisis context in particular, but also more broadly in different crises situations as the COVID-19 made us face at the current moment. And as we reconsider the role of education, the way we wanted to frame the conference was to initiate conversations at multiple levels. Basically, not only how do we rethink the role of education very broadly, but also more concretely, how do we rethink, how do we engage in research, how do we change our practices, whether it's in international development or our research practices or teaching practices. It also means how do we change our ways of being to address both the global health pandemic, but also looming environmental crisis as well. And also very directly related to the Agora session today, this is also an opportunity for us to rethink how we as a society should be, as a professional society, as it connects around 4,000 different people together, how we should rethink how we operate on a daily basis and also in relation to our annual meetings as well. So I will, at this note, as a very, very short introduction to the conference and to this very special event, I would like to introduce the two co-chairs of the virtual conference and also the co-chairs of the Agora event. So this is Robin Reed and Zsuzsa Milej, who both are appearing here on your screens as the co-hosts of this meeting. And I will hand over the microphone to them to introduce the invited speakers and to begin our Agora. Thank you, and welcome everyone.
Thank you, Iveta. So my name is Zsuzsa Milej, and I'm working at Tampere University in Finland. And this was a long-held process that we got into. We started about 2017 when Trump introduced the travel ban, and many people decided actually to boycott conferences in USA. But also there was a growing kind of nudge against the inequalities of conferences. Lots of people from the global south couldn't get to conferences, or they were really struggling to get visas, and the prices were conference. So that was the initial push that made lots of people around the world to think of conferencing. Then there were strengthening calls for academics to reduce carbon emission producing activities such as conference travel. Then Iveta became the president-elect, and she made us all to think together and think this beautiful conference theme, which actually made us compelled to act. So we couldn't do anything else than actually do this virtual pilot as an extension of the Miami conference to show that virtual conferencing has a future. Then in 2020, February, further travel ban or an expansion of the travel ban came with 6 more countries added. And then now today we are in the, as Iveta already said, we are at the Corona emergency situation where the conference was canceled and transferred to online platform. And in this context, I just wanted to say that it seems like our work practices both in institutions of higher education and in related arenas such as publishing, granting agencies have been massively disrupted. And I think that we do not yet see the implications on societal, political, and global levels, but they are coming. At the same time, we are very much involved with caring for others and ourselves which occupies a lot of time. So this is perhaps the perfect time to press pause on our normal working practices because continuing as usual would be untenable and unethical in my view. So it is untenable because there is a persistent demand to be productive, which the marketization of higher education and research demand us to do. And it's also unethical because we cannot continue with our business as usual when we need to care for others and care for our earth, which must be our priority. So some see this time as a time of despair and anxiety, but I think we might use this time for radicalization against global capitalism and the continued exploitation of the earth, and start and continue this conversation and actually act. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce our invited presenters because they are doing very important work for us to help us rethink academic conferences. So the first 2 persons I would like to introduce is Nick Holm, Dr. Nick Holm and Cy Teffel. They were the co-organizers of the Federal Conference with some other colleagues, and they were actually the first almost carbon zero conference organizers. And we admire their work very much, and they also were very kind of let us borrow some of their know-how, and I would like to say many thanks for that. So I invite them first to speak.
Okay, I guess, is that me then? Hello everybody, good afternoon I think to most of you from morning in Wellington, Aotearoa, New Zealand. My name is Nick Holm and I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see. Thanks everybody. What I'm going to be speaking about today is the Federal Conference, and don't worry, Si, I will clear up an important point very shortly about what we learned from running the Federal Conference. And it's, I guess, a set of knowledge that soon many more people than us will have, as everyone, as well, you guys will, having done this, you know, what works and what doesn't work. So, Federal was run in 2018, and it was branded as a, it was promoted as a nearly carbon neutral conference. I think Si will probably speak more about the nearly, being run by us at the Massey University Political Ecology Research Centre, in conjunction with the Wageningen Centre for Space, Place and Society, who helped us out with logistics. And this was actually our second stab at this, I need to make clear. We actually had an AFTERLIVES of Plastics conference in 2017, which was the first attempt, well, not more than an attempt, our first nearly carbon neutral conference run out of the Political Ecology Research Centre. And it was based on the lessons we learned from that. We kind of adapted and adjusted for the Feral Conference. For my sins, I was kind of the organizer for Feral, which was thematically concerned with the idea of nature or the non-human out of place, which kind of aligns with my own research interests in relationship to environmental ecological studies. And my role, which is what I'm going to speak to today, was front of house. Cy and I have worked together on a number of different projects over the years, and the division of labor is often Cy knows how it actually works, and I go out the front and shake my hands around and try and steer traffic. So that's kind of what I'm going to speak to in my 10 minutes. And there are 4 basic things that I want to kind of draw attention to. You know, 4 sets of lessons that I would say that I learned from kind of planning this and managing this. And I decided to arrange them alliteratively because that's what we do, right? So number 1, access, number 2, involvement, number 3, interface, and number 4, intentions. So I'm going to talk about each of those 4 things, which I think provide a rubric for making sense of what worked, what didn't work, and what little wisdom we have to share about this practice. And the first one's in terms of access. And this one's really important to me because I think a lot of discussions set out online conferencing as a panacea, as a kind of a solution that will miraculously address and solve so many problems that we have. And it does, it solves lots of problems that are really pertinent and really important for conferencing that you're probably all aware of. Obviously the environmental costs that was already raised. The physical limitations for those, you know, the many of us for whom travel is not that easy. Physical travel can be very demanding on the body, especially for those traveling to Aotearoa, New Zealand. We are a landmass which is very far away from almost everywhere, and it's incredibly difficult for people to get here who are not used to traveling. And obviously the economic problems as well. Economic inequalities, access to funding from our institutions who can travel. So an online conference can certainly solve these problems, but it sets up a whole new set of new problems that have to be thought about really carefully. And I'm not even sure they can be solved. So instead it kind of shifts the burden. And these can be mitigated to some extent, but we need to be aware. I mean, the first one I think is probably the most obvious. It's the one with the most literature around it, which is the digital divide. Who has access to technology, to stable internet? For example, I do a lot of work with a collaborator in South Africa. We don't usually video conference because her networks cannot support it. We usually use chat, right? So for her, reliable access to a stable network is simply not possible. And so this needs, so while of course the economic burden, the nature of the economic burden shifts, it's still very present. Who has access to stable infrastructure? Who has access to equipment and costs? The other one is, next one is confidence with the technology. Many people, and I might get in trouble for saying many older academics, struggle with adapting to these technologies. And this is something that's becoming very present right now as academics around the world try and haphazardly get their teaching up online through home-based computing systems. And so we need to be aware that not everyone's comfortable making a video. I'm not great making a video, frankly, right? And finally, there are time zones. I think you guys are finding the fun of this right now. It's something we are very, very aware of in New Zealand, something that we are constantly aware of, but maybe not in the front of mind for people in other parts of the world. That synchronicity and talking to each other at the same time is very difficult across online networks. So travel can have a real benefit for getting us all in the same time, not just the same place. So that's questions of access. Next is questions of involvement. And this was probably the biggest block for us in the Feral Conference, was getting people to come, persuading people why they should be part, because it involves a very different personal cost benefit analysis, because many of the usual benefits of conference attendance are absent. These are both formal and informal. Things like, the opportunity to travel, the opportunity to meet people, old friends, new friends, but also kind of more professional benefits such as building networks and finding opportunities are much more difficult in online spaces. it could also be difficult to acquire funding. People are less willing to pay when there's no lunch, but money is still required to run the back end, to pay for technical infrastructure, and to pay Keynotes, who otherwise just asking them to make a video, quite a long video, sometimes of new work. That's a lot of work for no compensation, which again can be very tough. And so in order to get people involved, it really needs to be a compelling event, something that people feel that they want to be part of without those regular benefits. Otherwise, you're just asking people to make a video and sit at home, which doesn't have the same, immediate appeal as a trip to, well, Portugal or Miami or somewhere, right? And number 3 then, and we were just talking about this before the session began, is what I've called interface, probably the wrong word. Conferences are really complex beasts, as anyone who's run one will know. But websites don't work well when they are that complicated. So while a conference program can be a complicated document, our website suffers, and it becomes even more complex when it's more than a representation, it's an interface. This seems to increase exponentially. So the website needs to simplify things often in ways, and that's what one of the things we did with the Feral conference. Really pertinent to me for Feral was also thinking about open or closed spaces. We ran with an open space, so members of the public could join in, and that required very tight moderation to control, because online anonymous publics are not known for their generosity and their staying on topic. So we had to be very careful to make sure that our presenters felt safe and discussions were not being derailed. So the discussion is as important as presentation. Online conferences are much more difficult to handle. I think, and I said, general online comments, we all know that conference presentations and question and answer sessions aren't always the most friendly, productive spaces either. So tight moderation is required in all zones to make sure that presenters are kind of active and being involved and feel safe and benefited in those spaces. We used an asynchronous forum method for ours because it was, frankly, we could control it better, and it allowed the asynchronicity of our presenters and delegates from around the world to take part. And so the final thing I just want to touch on is intentions, right? When we're switching from an in-person conference to a digital conference, I think the big question is, why are we doing this, right? I think it opens up the bigger philosophical question is, why do we have conferences in academia? What do they do? And I think there are a range of reasons, both scholarly and I guess more professional. By scholarly, I mean conferences can be a wonderful way to produce an exchange and share knowledge, an authentic, I don't like that word, but an authentic commitment to exchange and building knowledges together, building communities. But they can also be a way to bolster CVs. I don't want to throw that out. That's an important part, especially for early career scholars. It's not just a secondary activity. It's something that needs to be done. People need to know your name. You need to be involved if you want to be part of these communities. And so we need to think about why we're running the conference. Is it about sharing knowledge? I think that for me, the key question is whether we're sharing knowledge and development, sharing works in progress, or is it another form of dissemination, a way of presenting things that are already closed? I've always been a fan of conferences as a space to share work in progress. And I think that's even more pertinent with online conferences, because if we're sharing work that's already kind of closed, already finished, then it just becomes a new informal dissemination model. And I think that's also pertinent for in-person conferences. We don't need to travel around the world to share research that's already finished. Frankly, I don't think that's the most efficient or productive way. But work in progress can be very risky in online spaces. More open to abuse for ideas that aren't fully formed, more open to theft as well, unfortunately, in these spaces. And therefore, I want to end by saying I think trust and generosity are even more important in online conferences, and they're often absent in both academic environments and online environments. And when they get combined, it can get worse. Generosity cannot be assumed. It needs to be cultivated. So when you're running one of these things, you need to encourage people to take the time to respond to one another, to reach out, to offer useful feedback, and to actively seek connections. Online conferences, even more than in-person conferences, only work if everyone participates. And connections can require more proactive work, more reaching out to people and official and unofficial channels to say, I really enjoyed your work. This is what I thought. This is what was there. Those conversations need to take place even more importantly. And in the abstract, that can be a platitude, but I think concretely it's a problem. I think it's more important and more interesting as a problem. So I'm not saying we just need to be good to each other. That seems to go without saying. Rather, what I'm saying is these things, we need to work out how to cultivate them actively and proactively in order to make online conferencing work. And that's me for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So now we slide, and then we will have time for questions.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Hello, greetings to you all from Palmerston North in New Zealand. My name's Cy Taffel, and I'm, like Nick, a lecturer in media studies at Massey University. I've not been quite as well prepared as Nick. There's been a lot going on in the last week, so thank you all as well for giving up time at such a stressful and anxiety-inducing moment in time to be part of this session. And thank you also to Zsuzsa and Robin for inviting us to come and talk to you this morning or evening, depending on where you are in the world. So my involvement with online conferences started with the Afterlives of Plastic, which we ran in 2017, which came about because I was talking to Tricia Fowley, who's my co-chair at our Political Ecology Research Centre, about running a conference on plastics, which is her area of research. And we talked about the kind of the environmental impacts of flying, particularly running conferences in New Zealand. It's such a long way away for anyone to come. We only have 7 universities in New Zealand. To come from Australia even is at least a 3-hour flight. If you're coming from Perth, I think it's about an 8-hour flight. If you're coming from Europe, it's a 30-hour flight. So there are huge carbon emissions involved. And there are huge economic costs for people, which mean that PhD students, for example, simply cannot afford to come overseas to a conference if it's being held in New Zealand. So running something physically in New Zealand very much restricts the kind of audience that you can get, and it has really quite serious environmental repercussions, which for a conference about kind of the environmental repercussions of plastic waste seemed less than ideal. So we kind of said, well, why don't we think about running an online conference, and how would that work, and what would that involve, and could we get any institutional support to do this? Because often when we run in-place conferences, the university will help out with costs for venues, for catering, for keynotes. And what we learned very quickly is that there would be no institutional support whatsoever because online conferences were not recognized as a legitimate thing. So I said, well, it's all right. We've got a website for our research center. We can build something on top of that that will function as an online conference. It will be asynchronous, which we discussed timings quite a lot because in New Zealand we're GMT plus 12, which means it can be quite hard to align time zones with people. Once we had our abstracts in for the Afterlives of Plastic conference, which we'd always intended to have asynchronous presentations. So we'd said to people to record a video, to make something that could be posted to YouTube or Vimeo and embedded. But we had thought, do we want to have some synchronous plenary sessions? Once we got the abstracts in, we had presenters from New Zealand, Australia, Southeast Asia, Turkey, continental Europe, the UK and North America. And we kind of sat down with the list of time zones and said, so there's no way that we can do this so that it won't be 4 o'clock in the morning for someone. And actually, rather than exclude a group of people based on time zone, let's just go with doing things asynchronously. And we also had bandwidth concerns. In the last few years, New Zealand has had a couple of additional undersea fiber optic cables connected to it, which means that our urban internet has gotten much, much faster. A few years ago, we had real worries whether our video conferencing would work well enough for something like this kind of session. there are many places in the world that have less connectivity in terms of bandwidth than New Zealand, for which synchronous still doesn't work very well. So there are questions to consider around whether to go synchronous and asynchronous in terms of what you're doing. And what we had in addition to the presentations were kind of threaded comments. So because our website uses WordPress, which is really commonly used for building websites now, but originally in the early 2000s was developed as an open source blogging tool, it means that having some kind of text-based interaction through comments is very much core to that platform and very easy to enable. So that seemed like a straightforward way that I could build something that would work and which would allow people to talk. What we learned through that first run is that there needs to be quite a concerted effort to encourage people to talk, because actually what really makes the conference come alive is not the presentations, it's the discussion that goes on around it. And I think we did a much better job of that when we came back to Feral, because we had a much more kind of formal and organized way of sharing online panels, asking presenters to ask each other questions. And actually, as with a lot of online teaching, once things get going, it kind of snowballs and people get interested in being involved. If things are very quiet, no one wants to be the first person to comment. One of the things we've done with our online conferences is describe them as being nearly carbon neutral, not carbon free or zero carbon. And in part that's because a lot of my kind of research is on the environmental impacts of technology, which are huge. When we think that the devices that we're all using now to conference with each other contain kind of typically Congolese tantalum, tin, tungsten, and gold, which are all conflict minerals, Congolese cobalt, which is associated with child labor, Atacama lithium, which has created huge water shortages and problems for indigenous peoples in one of the most arid places on the planet. They're associated with rare earth element refining in China, which again has catastrophic environmental consequences. And all of the transportation, the production is hugely carbon intensive as well. Which might not sound like technology is therefore a great way to address environmental problems. However, it's not a case of saying, so this is the solution and this is carbon zero and free and wonderful and flying is bad. You have to look at these things in comparison. And even if you were talking about buying a new laptop computer specifically for an online conference and then throwing it away, which I would assume that no one in their right mind would do, the carbon footprint would still be significantly lower than that of flying. Flying is very much something that is socially normalized, so we don't tend to think about the scale and scope of the emissions related to it. We see everyone else flying to conferences. It's understood as something that you're meant to be doing, and it is something that can be very pleasurable because you get to go and see a new city, a new country. And so it's something that's very much part of the fabric of academic life. And that's something that we might want to think about. And I don't think with that it should be a one-size-fits-all approach either. I did my PhD at the University of Bristol. I saw in our text chat there are a couple of people from Bristol here today. At Bristol, within kind of 4 hours on a train, there are probably 75, 100 universities and a huge number of researchers. Where I am now in Palmerston North, 4 hours on anything other than a car would get me to one other university, which is again part of the motivation for me behind saying, well, can we experiment with these online spaces? Are there ways that we can work that are less environmentally damaging than having to get on a plane to go and see almost anyone? I think I've been going for 10 minutes, so I might leave it there and we can open up for questions.
Thank you so much. Robin, you step in?
Yeah, wow, my brain is spinning. Thanks for that. It's definitely things that we on the virtual conference team have been thinking about and talking about for quite some time now, but it's different to be in the midst of it than to have someone else kind of explaining to you what your experience has been like. So there's so much of what you said that has rung true to me. We want to open up the floor now to some questions. I think the best way for anyone in the audience to ask a question is actually to type it into the chat. While I'm waiting for you to have a minute to get that through and type away, I think I'll start with my first question. And I think it's a question that kind of jumped right into our faces this morning. One of the ways that we really appreciate some of your tips on the importance of asynchronous programming. And so one of the ways that we try to change the way we engage as academics in this online space is by having these amazing recorded paper sessions where everyone submitted their papers in advance in a beautiful recording. I'm so impressed by the video skills in our society, actually. And the idea is that you can watch those videos in advance and then jump into the session, which would be a full 90 minutes of just discussion, as opposed to what we normally run into, which is there's just not enough time to talk here. But when we started these sessions today, we actually found that not very many people were engaged, and it was quite, maybe we didn't communicate clearly enough what the expectations were or what we were hoping for here. Could you talk to us a little bit maybe about how your experience with the engagement and how you get people to kind of jump over the inhibitions of really working in this new space and in new ways and to take the risk and to get engaged? And anyone else, please keep your questions in the chat and I'll just keep asking them as they come.
So do you want that? Do you want to?
So, I mean, the first thing I think I would say is that we should acknowledge that it is hard, particularly I think when it's a new way of doing things for people. And I think it's probably fair to say across the two events we've run, our experience, the lives
Uh-oh.
than we had hoped. So we then went back and reflected on that and what we did. So for Feral, we were also fortunate that we had my internet connection is unstable, it says. We had a larger organizing committee, which was one thing that really helped because it meant we could have a larger number of people chairing individual panels, getting in contact with panelists before, preparing kind of opening posts to invite conversation amongst participants. And it did seem that once things got going, people felt happy to get involved, but no one wanted to be the person to take the first steps. So arranging for people to always be taking those first steps and get a conversation going was something that we found really helped.
Yeah, just one thing that maybe was an advantage for us is that Massey University, we do a lot of online teaching. We're New Zealand's distance university. And so we have a lot of experience in online classrooms, which we knew that you can't just open up a forum. Doesn't work in any context. Someone needs to be first. And so we devised quite elaborate systems. There was a chair for each panel, and the chairs were academics, you know, senior people, and in many cases I was also, as the director, kind of also present in all of them, just kind of flipping around. And so what we did was we tried to have a question for each of the presenters in a panel to get them to reflect. We invited them to speak to each other, to ask questions of each other, and we felt that seeded the discussion. It's all about seeding it. And once there's a few comments in there, then people are willing to begin to roll. It's all a matter of breaking the ice, getting things moving, getting things underway. And once people are interested, then they will hopefully begin to take part. Not every session worked, to be honest, especially at the end of the conference. One of the things, time is so important in these things. One of the things we learned was in the first weeks, people were checking in regularly to all panels. By the third week, because we ran it across 3 weeks to give everything a room to breathe, potentially not many people were logging in every day. So that was one thing we really learned as well, and the extraction conference is happening this year, so I'm not sure what the team this year is going to learn from what we learned in Feral about that, was trying to make sure everyone was immediately actively involved, seizing the conversation, making sure no one had to be the first person was always somebody involved with the conference, which made it less scary.
I see there's a lot of questions coming up, so thanks everyone. I actually have never done this before, so pardon me as I try to keep up. I've seen a few here talking about the institutional support and some of the tech challenges around this. For those of you who are on the line, we were so lucky to have the ASU tech team jump in at the very last minute and help us with a lot of technical issues that we ran into as we tried to ramp this up. Can you talk a little bit about the technology that you're using, the challenges that you're running into, the costs that are associated with all of this, and how you're overcoming those kinds of obstacles?
That's you.
So the support we've had from our institution is really quite minimal. Certainly on the tech side, there's nothing. The one thing we have had is we've got a PhD student who works as a research assistant that I've kind of worked with, and she's now kind of confident working with. So we're using WordPress with one of the many kind of proprietary plugins for it that give you a front side visual interface editor, so you can see what you're editing as you're doing it, and it makes creating fairly sophisticated pieces of visual design very straightforward. We're running that on our own kind of website, which is separate from the university website. So we have funding for Lisa's work as a hourly paid PhD student. We have enough funding through our research center that covers that, and which covers the domain name and hosting for the website. And other than that, it's just been our time that's gone into it. And this is part of why we went down that asynchronous kind of WordPress and getting people to post things to Vimeo or YouTube route, was that we really didn't have any support. Fortunately, one of the things about online conferences is that most of the financial costs that you have associated with an in-place event, your venue hire, your catering, your drinks reception, and paying travel for keynotes, all are things that don't actually exist. So both of the online conferences that we have run for the cost of a few $100s, which is the hourly paid labor that one person has gone into helping with conference organization, and then the time of us as the academic team.
To build on that though, I mean, getting keynotes then becomes very difficult, as I kind of mentioned quickly, because they need to be willing and able to do this work basically without pay. So it involved a lot of hustle, frankly. I had to write a lot of emails because I've got a much higher no rate than I have any other event I've ever run before, because keynotes often like it to come to New Zealand. That's a very nice thing to say. But yeah, in an online space, trying to convince people, especially non-academics, with Feral, there's some really good work being done kind of in the journalistic sector, and Fred Pierce was amazing and volunteered his time. And we are very thankful to him for that, but a few other people I reached out to, with quite a few, couldn't do it. Like, they can't do unpaid work. It's just not part of their lifestyle. So that gets shut down. That kind of opportunity evaporates, and that's a shame in terms of building connections.
And it is something that Nick says very much relies on the generosity of some fairly senior scholars, and Fred Pierce is a journalist whose time wasn't covered at all. But we have had people like Fred. For the Afterlives of Plastic, we had Richard Thompson, who's the marine biologist who coined the term microplastics, who probably wouldn't ever have been free enough in terms of time to come to New Zealand. So he was amazing to have. And for Extraction later this year, we're going to have Tony Buffington, who's a big person in the kind of extraction political ecology field. So we are very lucky to have some incredibly generous senior scholars who are willing to give up time to do this for free.
Yes, we can definitely relate to some of those challenges. In fact, it took a lot of emails even to get the facilitators who joined us on this session today. So thanks to those of you who were brave enough to try this out with us and will be helping us in the next portion. I think we have time for a few more questions before we move on. And I think one of the big ones here is around legitimization of this kind of conference. I know we have many, particularly for us this year, many scholars that really require a certificate at the end of this or proof that they have participated in an academic event in order to get their funding. Are you finding that your work is helping to push that forward a little bit more, and any tips that you can share with us to help make sure our institutions see this as a legitimate way of academic engagement?
Yikes. I mean, here's my answer is this might not be as legitimate as a conference. I think that's maybe one we can't go in assuming it is. It does different things. And that's kind of what I was trying to say at the end of my presentation. I'm not sure this is a conference. I think it's something good. I think it's something productive, but I'm not sure it is a conference. I think it's a new kind of forum for producing, it feels more like producing work that persists. And I think in that sense, it's halfway between a conference and a journal, maybe not halfway, but it's between those two forms. I think maybe its distinctiveness maybe needs to be acknowledged more if we're going to get legitimacy, rather than saying this is the same thing as a conference. There needs to be an discussion saying it's not a conference, it's something else. It's a new thing we can do now. It's worth doing for these particular reasons. And we need to build on that.
And it's a new thing that is not homogenous, because this kind of synchronous session might in some ways be closer to what we conventionally understand as a conference to a website with videos that are publicly accessible, which do persist. In terms of legitimating them, one thing that I think can and will help is publications coming out of things. So out of the Afterlives of Plastic, we've got an edited collection that was due to come out soon, but we'll see what happens with publishing and the material world over the coming months. Being able to point that you've been to an event and stuff has come out of it and been published in peer-reviewed kind of journals or edited collections, I think will help. The other thing I would say with our online conferences, we've had artists and educators get in touch with us well after the fact to say, we've just found this thing and it's an amazing resource that we can use for inspiration for our creative practice or for pedagogy in the classroom, which is not something that is true of a conventional conference. So totally agree with what Nick said. It is something that has some different affordances.
Just quickly answer one of the questions in the chat around that. Different type of legitimacy is getting institutions to pay for them. If we could get institutions to cough up $30–40 per participant, that would make these things so much easier to run. And I think that is the kind of work that will need to be done. I think in the EU, there are some models where institutions pay for, it's shifts around publishing models, which I think are productive. And I think the EU is ahead of us in many ways for this kind of thing. So hopefully that kind of space would be better, might be a place where we can see movement. Like, this is a new kind of thing. It costs less than a conference, but it does cost something. And if that can be made to happen, if a major conference like CIES does it, I think that would be a good way to, if a major organization did this, I think that would be a big step, right? Because we're just the massive political ecology research center, right? It's hard for us to say we've invented a new thing, you've got to give us money. I don't know if that would work, but if associations get on board, I think that would help change things.
We sure do hope so. I think I'll go with two more. Avetta, as I'm looking for you to give me the signal when we need to switch over, but I think we could do it for a few more minutes. There's a question here. I'm sorry I'm not able to shout out everyone's names as they go, but the questions are going fast and furiously, and I'm trying to pay attention at the same time. But there's a question here around work in progress. I think our society has a lot of students that are coming to share work in progress with us and get feedback in a safe space. And that, as you mentioned, kind of goes away a bit when you're online. For me, one of the biggest joys of this conference for me is kind of it forced the society to go into publicly accessible space that anyone can access. That has caused some issues along the way today, but for me, that's a huge win that this work is all out there in the public domain. But of course, that does cause some issues. Have you run into any serious issues that you could share with us that we could learn from, or have any tips or tricks to help us make this more of a safe space? And I'm going to double question this one to get a little bit more of your face time here while we have you. There's another great question right at the end of the chat about language. CIES is a diverse society. In recent years, we've tried to engage with some Spanish language sessions. Last year, we were in San Francisco, so we included a Chinese session, which is easy to do in a tiny little room when you can pull people together, and much more challenging. How do you guys deal with the language barrier to ensure that your conferences are open and more inclusive?
We haven't got there yet, have we, Si? I mean, I should apologize off the front. I know that for non-English speakers, I can be very difficult to understand. I should have flagged that. But transcription software is available, is it not, Si, in online?
The thing we've done is something that we haven't done, which is to encourage people to use YouTube, which is always something that I feel slightly conflicted about in terms of their status as a not entirely pleasant, massive corporation, which makes money from algorithms which push people towards extremism. But one of the things that their very good data scraping machine learning algorithms do is automatic transcription and now bits of translation. And so it's the kind of double-edged sword of using a platform that in some ways I'm kind of uncomfortable with, but because it's so big and has so much function, they've actually started addressing that for, so you can get subtitles and you can get some translation as well to a few languages, which starts to address that problem in a way that we simply couldn't because we're doing it on a shoestring with no budget.
But the YouTube thing, Si, obviously opens up to the first part of that question, which is the abuse. Right, Ariane, our keynote, gave a presentation on feral feminism, is what she called it, which was a fantastic presentation. But because we were hosting on YouTube, I don't know, the algorithm drives terrible people towards the word feminism. And the comment section was a train wreck. And Ariane thankfully has thick skin, but we can't control YouTube. We can't moderate YouTube in the way we could moderate our own forums. So it was a problem that opened up that the translation and the subtitles made possible, but then that opened us up to other problems. And Si, do you have any tech solutions?
And I think the thing that we will put in place off the back of that for this year is a suggestion so one of the things we do once we accept abstracts is send through kind of instructions with links to past presentations so that people get an idea of some of the variety of things that people have done and the platforms they've hosted them on. One thing we will be suggesting is that you disable comments on your YouTube channel, because there's, like, as you say, a huge difference between the tone and generosity of the comments on the conference website, which were generally lovely and warm and kind, and then what you get from the alt-right on YouTube, because there's the word feminist in something.
But just comments on our website were not always kind. There were a few members of the public who were confused, I think, by the conference. And I just had to deal with them in a respectful but quick way, saying, you know, really glad to have you, really glad to have you here, really glad to have your viewpoint. It's not entirely what we're trying to do, but we will try and address your question.
Really interesting to think about that dynamic when you can't control it as much as you can control it when we're all together in a space where there's hotel security and lots of other stuff to do. We've had some issues already in our conference with trolling. So while there's so many people on the line, maybe this is a great opportunity to note that if you do have a session scheduled and you set up the Zoom link or the back end of that, you can take some steps in order to kind of protect yourself a little bit. So check your inbox. Instructions were sent around earlier. But because these are public spaces, anyone can jump in. And if you have your meeting set up the right way, they can take over your screen and take over the sound and do whatever they would like. And what they would like sometimes is very, very disturbing. So please do check your inboxes and take a few minutes to just go back and edit your meeting invite. You just edit in the back end, and normally it doesn't change the link in any way, shape, or form. But if you did need a link change, then please contact us, because we do want to make sure this is as safe a space as possible. It doesn't look like there's any more questions here that are really burning to be asked. So I wanted to give Iveta and Zuzia a chance to see, did you guys have anything else that you wanted to add in, or questions while we have Nick and Sai here with us?
No. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so we're about to start the next part of this session, which I have to say is 100% experiment. So please bear with us. I'm just going to jump in and put into the chat a link that you can click to check out our breakout sessions. So essentially what happens next, I think you should all see that. What happens next now is that we're all going to separate into different Zoom rooms. And I think I can share my screen to show you what we've got in store for you. I believe you see the right screen now, or do you see chat questions from the Agora? Do you see the right thing, Iveta?
Yeah.
Okay, good, because whenever I do this, I get the wrong thing on my own personal screen. So everyone check your bingo card, or do you see my screen, please? We have these breakout sessions. We have some excellent facilitators that are joining us in this experiment. The idea here is that we're going to break out for half an hour, Iveta, Zuzia, 30 minutes, into these separate groups. You can access the Zoom links by the link that I just posted in the chat directly. If you click that, you'll end up with something that looks a lot like our program calendar, and you can jump into the Zoom links. The idea here is that we're kind of giving you an idea of a concept or a question that is going to be explored in that session, but really it's just a chance for us on the smaller groups to discuss what we've learned today, what we're thinking about the conference so far, and really ways that we can push the society, our field, and all of academia maybe towards the more carbon neutral and more equitable conferencing for all. So what's going to happen is we're all going to leave this room, click on that Airtable link, decide which breakout session you want to join in. Our hosts will be there. It will be whatever it is for the next 30 minutes. At any time, if you get lost, you can join back into the WebEx session or the webinar session that we're in right now. Iveta will stay on the back end of this to help anyone who gets lost along the way. We ask in your breakout groups if you could have someone who is a note taker. If you were able to access Slack, some of you might have gotten Slack invitations. We really tried to figure that out for this session. So if you do have access, we encourage you to take notes in Slack, so that space is available, and we will be hoping to add everyone into that Slack space throughout the duration of the conference to continue these conversations asynchronously as we go. If you don't have access to that, don't worry. I also was not able to get access, and I have all the back-end support in the world to help me. So if you don't, please just take notes in your session, and we'll collect them from you afterwards. In about a half an hour, we're asking you to join right back into this WebEx link. You'll find it in the Airtable that I shared with you all with the schedule of breakout groups. And we're just going to ask each of the facilitators to take a minute or two to share one or two major key points that came up in your group and your ideas for moving forward. So thank you again to our panelists. We hope that you join us in our sessions if you're at all interested, but we really appreciate your time today and all of the lessons that you shared with us that helped us be able to turn our very tiny pilot conference into the very first virtual conference for our society. So thank you so much for your support. And I will see those of you who want to join me in the breakout room shortly. So thank you.
Right, we will see everybody back in half an hour then.
Talking about gathering in person or gathering virtually. And it was an acknowledgement that, in fact, we may be reinforcing some of the inequities as we move to virtual places with who has access, not just to the language, but the pedagogy, the dialectic. How do we hold with an online virtual space? How do we deal with different ontological issues here? If we were to actually pursue this, would we have some training on biases so we actually understand how to slow down with who's typing fast or who speaks first or who feels comfortable in some of these modalities, who it tends to favor, all the invisible biases that come up? And how do we really think about access? Not just, yes, there's big issues in terms of bandwidth, and who can call in and who has stable connections. But there's many layers of these access questions. And the other side of this came in terms of, we're talking about a form in a way, whether we're talking about online or in person. And there's a deep question for us to get clear on the purpose and then really understand. I think this is what Nick was getting to in terms of the intention and the presentation, but really what's the purpose? And then what are the forms that fit that? And then how do we think through some of the complexities around the politics of who can be included and who is going to be excluded. And I feel that this is a personal view, but these are kind of some of the central issues of our times right now. And I think both for CIES as a community, but I think for all of us, how do we handle these contradictory ways of communicating and find other ways that we can proceed. So I'll leave it there for now for others to share as well. And thank you. It was a good dialogue and just the beginning of something that we really need to go much deeper into.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lynn. This is wonderful. And hopefully we also hope that the moderators can summarize some of these questions so that we can share with the broader CIES community later and actually engage them in these discussions. And, to take it really seriously, because these issues are in our face now and we really should not be turning away. So Zsuzsa, do you want to go next? Because you will need to leave soon, right?
Yes, apologies everybody, but I have to facilitate a session that is coming up and it's midnight here in Finland. And just quickly what we talked about, I was asked to talk a little bit about how we did this conference, but then I shared that I think what we really need to do, so our question was about, what about virtual conferences? What are the benefits? How can we reproduce a conference in a virtual space, and so on. And what the metaphor I shared is virtual conferencing is like vegetarian meals. So it is not made to replace actually the conference, but we have to really rethink what we do in this space. And I think that was very much chiming in with Sai and Nick's presentation that virtual conference is not really a conference, so it's something different. So we started from there, and then there were several other issues raised, such as, the culture of the conference, or we talked about the Afro-centric conference, or to work with the different geopolitical spaces. We talked about knowledge keepers, these colonial spaces, and the languages associated with that. And the word office was brought up as a solution maybe, but then we discussed that actually marginal languages are not there, so this is not really good solution. This is very important to build capacity, and we talked about how much energy is to put in and actually maintain a conference, and talked about compressing or decompressing conferences, because when you go to a conference, actually you are there intensively, you set aside this time, but when you are in a virtual space, you actually have to be there together with the other duties that you have in life. So you kind of everywhere and not there, and so it's difficult. But also the energies that are requiring from people who are in the back end to organize and keep things together, and how to motivate people to keep them contributing and being interested. So therefore we also talked about the social aspects and whether we can do something around that. We talked about wine parties and actually doing music together through mobile phones, if you can imagine. So you can actually play on different instruments and then chime together on the mobile phone. So this was something we talked about. And then maybe the form of the conference, we talked a little bit about whether it is okay to do at the same time, and then hubs talking different times together, or what are the scales that are the best, smaller conferences, bigger conferences, what is the importance of a keynote. And we all agreed that actually the keynote can really set the tone for the whole conference and carry some kind of thoughts through, and people can resonate with the keynote speak. I'm looking at the notes, which I will share, and we talked a lot about intimacy, how to maintain that in an online space, and of course also geographical distance and time, and asynchronous, synchronous conferencing, which basically were more of questions. We did not find too many answers to all these difficult things, but at least we know what are the issues that we need to consider when we want to rethink, what conferencing means virtually. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zsuzsa. Great summary. So who would like to go next? Jason, why don't you go next? You were supposed to kind of kick off the session.
Sure. I was a group of one, so a little singlet. So I just brainstormed a bunch of ideas, and I threw it all into a Google Doc here, which I can gladly share my screen and make it easier on y'all. So I just broke down my question into various pieces and tried to take different approaches to it. So I didn't come up with solutions. I just came up more with where are we currently. So when we start thinking about our identities, I think that as an academic, our identities are often tightly bound to flying, because we always see ourselves, zipping from here to there, meeting up with folks. So one of the issues we got our job literally by flying, usually flew somewhere to do a job interview, and we get promoted by flying as far as our promotion and tenure process. We get consulting gigs by flying to working with folks in the, no matter what our work is. And we have our annual lifelong friends that we make it at conferences. Without flying, where does that put us? And if we start thinking about flying, are we teachers or are we academics? So where does our spread look if we're just only restricting our interactions to our hometowns? And with this whole COVID-19, we're really seeing that we support a lot of economic sectors. So we're seeing a lot of decimation in local contexts without us being there. I actually broke this down by various pieces as far as what are some of the benefits of the university flying. The university gets notoriety, more presenters show a stronger commitment to the ethos of the mission of the conference. It shows where the think tanks are. I don't know if you all do this, but I always search different universities to see who are the big players in the game and on what topics. We meet our potential hires at conferences, and we showcase who are our local experts. Put up your hand or unmute yourself. Yeah, actually, I think someone's popped in. We also get a lot of personal benefits from this, right? We collaborate with others. We have a lot of social time. We make new contacts. We mentor new students. We build community. We check out new cities. That's what I love to do. So I try to flip this around. What are the benefits? Well, we would save money. Taxpayers would save some money, and we'd personally save some money. We would probably save a lot of our time. We try to balance all of this. We probably have to shift where our focus is, maybe more of a dedication to local community, maybe more local acts, make us rethink what our job looks like. It would probably be less stress on new academics trying to balance it all. But then again, I just put here with the caveat that we probably would decimate local economies. And I did try to break this down into other pieces of the question as far as what do we currently practice. We know that peer review conferences are the best. We know that big name conferences have more clout. So if we shift more virtual conferences, we might have more smaller conferences. So would it count less? And in my university, the university pays for all conferences without question. So that's one of our current practices. They don't care where it is, but we do bifurcate by international, national, and local. I know at some universities, they actually get points for these different types of conferences. So we'd have to rethink what do those look like and how do we count those? Of course, P&T, promotion and tenure, plays out here. And of course, issues with how external folks, if I'm thinking about promotion and tenure, when they look at our stuff, would they view us differently if we only went to virtual conferences? And last, I looked at what does the implication for sustainability look like here? Conferences are our homes. We would probably have a loss of identity on who we are. And do we have, how can you get that identity and community building without that physical content? And we're often judged by good if we're accepted into X conference. And right now as academics, travel is often viewed as success if you're out and about.
Jason,
That was
that's a
all
great brainstorming
self-taught.
list. Jason, that was a great brainstorming list that you did on your own, and I hope we can use that to continue the discussion and get some other people to add to to this list as well. But your last point is so pertinent, because right now travel is equated with success very often, but there is also the whole movement, right, of academics who are pledging not to travel and who are really trying to turn this logic around. So it will be really interesting. I think it's a really important consideration to how each single one of us contributes to that.
Yep.
Awesome. So I think we are kind of short on time, so we are going to run quickly. Our next group was on the benefits of virtual conferencing, and it was facilitated by Gustavo and Jenna, who kicked everybody out of the room.
Okay.
In another room. Just kidding.
Not everyone was present to hear that. So what happened was I developed the link for Robin's session and Gustavo developed a link for our session, and our session didn't work. So I gave Robin my session and made a new one, and it kicked her session out. So my apologies to everybody in Robin's session, and thanks to everybody in our session, which was a lot of fun. So sorry about ruining your party, folks, but Gustavo promised he would start with the reporting back, so I'll leave it to him.
Thank you, and thank you to Jan, Yvette, and Robin, and everybody that organized this virtual conference. That is really a milestone in the society. And I think that one of the points that we discussed was that this is something that we should continue to do. No matter what, we should continue. And this is a really good experiment, and we should treat it as researchers and pay attention to all the problems and all the benefits, and start to make more recommendations for how to improve this. So based on Nick's point, one of the concerns was the issue of how do we treat the videos or the papers that were presented, and how to prevent them from not being stolen and fraudulent activities. And perhaps the easiest will be to require everybody to post using a Creative Commons license, and to attach to every video, to treat the videos or the papers as preprints. So CIES will give to every preprint and video a unique ID, plus the Creative License Commons. We start to establish authorships and archival capacities. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it moves into positive direction. The other is that we also think that is a very good idea that should be explored. What's the name of this? If it's not an academic conference, how do we call it? And also think that perhaps this modality is addressing one of the common concerns in the traditional academic conferences, that we get more benefits from the social aspects and the networking, and the part that was related to the scholarly and scientific discussion and debates was minimized. So perhaps here we increase the opportunities to engage in the research side and the scholarly discussions a bit more, and we are not going to be engaging in the social networking. Is that a problem? I don't think that is either a problem or a solution, but it's a new characteristic that we need to explore. Jana, am I missing anything?
No, not at all. That was wonderful. We did talk about how there is this great community building around the hashtag vCIES on social media. And so one of our participants was Noe, and we met on Twitter. And so this was the first time we met in person almost. And that was a really magical part of this conference for us. So we did say there were some benefits of building a community online and finding those spaces, And that's it. Gustavo really summed up the bulk of our conversation already.
Hey, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Gustavo and Jenna. So we have our next group is Policies for Academic and Professional Work, and we had Supriya Bailey and Mike Russell in that group. So if you could share insights from your discussions, it would be great.
Sure, I'll get started quickly and then Mike can jump in from whatever I leave out. First of all, thanks everyone. It was really great to be able to be part of this Agora today. And there were 3 of us in our group, which was small, but we were at different stages of our career. And so we really, our question really was what policies could we consider to change academic work and practices? And how can we make universities responsible and accountable? And I think we came up with sort of 2 big issues that we would like to sort of raise for people to continue to think about. The first is there's a lot of rhetoric of sustainability on campuses. A lot of people are talking about it, they're doing things related to it, they're setting things up. But the institutional practices of hiring, promotion, tenure, those kinds of things are not seeing a parallel willingness to accept sort of ways of sustainable professional growth and professional development and identity. And so part of what we would encourage people to think about is what power do you have at your institutions to be able to start to bring these conversations up when you're in hiring practices or you're looking at CVs of junior scholars or tenure track committees and things like that, to recognize that there are other ways to disseminate knowledge and those should be valued as well. The other thing that we talked about was the value that we have all gotten, at least those of us who have been further along, we know how much CIES has given to us and what we've been able to get out of this. But as this society grows, it's not enough for faculty mentors or even professionals in as different organizations telling newer colleagues or younger or graduate students that you have to go, that you should be at the conference because it's an important thing to do for your career. Because a lot of times, early career scholars and practitioners don't know what to get out of the conference. So a greater onus, if they're going to spend that kind of money and time and effort to come, some better mentoring around what to get out of the conference rather than just sort of making it a place that they must go for their careers. So those were sort of the 2 big ideas, and we put that out there in the interest of time. Mike, is there anything else I left out?
No. I guess I would just add, based on Jason's comment, if we're going to say that travel equals success, and I think that that's accurate, I think that that's true. Do we want that to be the case going forward? And is that really the most equitable and environmentally sustainable way to approach things? And I think the issues of hiring and promotion that you discussed feed directly into that.
Thank you so much. And we have 2 minutes left for Carly Minion to talk about the knowledge mobilization.
Okay, thank you. We had six of us talking about, well, we started off with the question of what do carbon-free academic practices mean for knowledge mobilization. And we had quite a varied conversation, mainly about virtual conferences and moving things online and changing nature of the challenges associated with that. So a lot of the points that have been discussed were brought up in our small group. So I'll try not to repeat those. We all felt, I think, committed to the need and the desire to reduce our carbon footprint in our activities related to knowledge mobilization, but also within our professional lives as academics, practitioners, researchers, etc. I think I already apologized to my group in advance if I've missed a point that they have raised, but I think I'd just like to reiterate the importance for us of engagement. Being able to promote the type of engagement that Nick and Cy both highlighted as being critically important. We talked about how, physical conferences, for example, there's different types of downtime and more, chances for informal exchanges. And so we thought that it's important that we create more varied connections so that the virtual conference doesn't have to carry all the responsibility for fulfilling all the things that a conference is meant to bring to participants. So, and we thought that we need to put some thought and care into, and I would say doing this very democratically, to establish ground rules for virtual conferences or whatever we want to call them, and talking about the importance of cultural change, you know, within the society, amongst our membership, and our leadership as well. Issues, you know, different disparities that were discussed by others, as well as Cy and Nick, include, you know, the reality that social capital is very unevenly distributed. And, you know, in terms of the creation and the sustaining of social capital, and this is what on-site or physical conferences can bring. So how do we recreate those opportunities online? We had some suggestions for, you know, writing letters to senior scholars and sending them, and then you wait for a reply. And so engaging in a more slow type of engagement, questioning, and networking. So reimagining what networking looks like in the world that we want. So I think I'm probably over time already. So I think I'll wrap it up here. But I just want to thank everyone. I've been given lots of food for thought. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Carly. Actually, Amber, do you want to add something maybe from any of the discussions you were in? And actually somebody, Vidor, posted a really interesting question about also the perspectives from the international development practice that are missing in this conversation. But since we promoted Amber to be a panelist, I thought I'll give you some space to talk about this as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I mostly wore my treasurer's hat for the brief part of the discussion that I had, and I think as many people know, we have a 5-year contract with the Hyatt that we'll need to be considering and looking at and having conversations about. So just to not to pour too much water on some of these discussions, the possibility of completely moving away from an in-person conference. But the opportunities I think that this presents in terms of engaging with other people, in terms of, and then two of us had recently, Francine and I had both recently participated in the Interagency Network for Education and Emergencies meeting that went kind of emergency-wise. It had been scheduled in November for Lebanon, and we moved it to virtual. And so there were a lot of creative ways of working with that to make that work a little better. So I think as we learn from others, and this conversation was great today to hear how other people are managing these conversations and doing their best to engage people on different platforms and different time zones. I think that'll continue to present this group both challenges and opportunities, for sure.
Thank you so much, Amber. And we'll have more conversations. So I really see it as the beginning of the conversation for the CIES to address this really important issue. I am planning to establish an ad hoc committee to look into these issues really seriously and also offer policy recommendations for the society as well. So if any of you are interested to be a part of that committee, please email me or text me or let me know in one way or another, so that we can mobilize the people who have the interest and the enthusiasm and passion to think through these issues. And Amber, I just wanted to say that, yes, we do have the contract with Hyatt for the next 5 years, but that does not mean, it actually could be a really good time for us to think how we can shift our work in different ways, because it will be impossible to abandon kind of our ways of being established historically in just one moment. So it probably will be a gradual shift, but I think we need to begin making that shift immediately, almost. Well, we are kind of making that shift already. So we'll be, I think it's a really good time to be very thoughtful and proactive about it. But in closing, because we are running out of time, I actually wanted to give maybe Nick and Cy and Robin a space maybe just for final closing remarks or any ideas that you would like to share with us. And I wanted to thank very much both Sai and Nick for joining us, helping us think through some of these ideas. Really appreciate you joining. But so the last word for you and for Robin, okay?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's really appreciated. And it turns out we have nothing else to do right now. Worked out. That was convenient, I guess. It's incredibly heartening too, because Sai has been doing this, and I've helped for one of them for a few years now. We did it on a shoestring. We do it with a small team, and it's fantastic to see a major organization taking it seriously, putting together different teams, think about different aspects. I think the most heartening thing is to see some of the very practical answers to some of the questions we've had. They're coming out of these sessions. That's great to. I'm big on very precise solutions. These aren't meant to be thought problems. These are meant to be, well, how do we solve them? And I think some of the answers here have been incredibly practical. And I think that's if your organization can implement them, then that's could be a real leader in helping other organizations follow.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Nick.
I think just to echo that, it's been wonderful kind of talking and hearing from you, and having so many people really thinking about online conferences and how they might work, or how they could work, and what they can do and what they can't do, because I don't think they are a one-size-fits-all solution or a magic bullet to do all of the things that traditional conferences have done. I think some of the discussions were about things like could we have more local conferences and online things, and I think there's a balance to be found, and it's great that so many wonderful people are thinking about this now.
Thanks, Sai, so much. Robin, I'll leave you for the last
I just want to jump in and give huge shout outs to my co-chair, Zuza, who I know is on the line in the background of the chat. This really is possible due to countless hours of her time coordinating back and forth with lots of people. I think you can tell from how some of the breakouts didn't work, this really was an experiment for us. So thanks so much for Zuza for your vision on this and your leadership on this, and for all of you for joining in on this fun experiment. I just want to remind everyone that CIES this year is really different, because there kind of is no actual conference program, really. It's changing constantly because our world is changing constantly, and people have to be able to respond to the realities of their daily life as they change. So it's a real privilege to be able to create kind of a space for us to connect with each other in this moment. Check out the calendar. There's all kinds of things that are going to happen. We're extending into April for those who still need to present, and there'll be different kinds of fun social activities. We're still working on the networking pieces and those opportunities, especially for our new scholars, to make sure that they benefit in the ways that we really try to ensure that they can benefit from their membership dues. And lastly, I just want to say, for those of you on the line who aren't quite sure how all of this works, CIES really works if you just show up and roll up your sleeves and get involved. I came on board because I really like the theme of the conference. I really like working with Iveta, and I just tapped her on the shoulder and said, hey, I might have a bit of technical skills in the background that you could use to, support this work. And here I am today as one of the co-chairs of this amazing, beautiful conference. So I encourage all of you, if this is something that you're passionate about, the only way that this is going to happen is if we all make the time and space and push it forward. There isn't a lot of money, there isn't a lot of support, and all we can really do is support each other and make this happen. So keep an eye out for those conversations that will be coming. They will be open to all, and if you feel like you're not invited into them, please tap us on the shoulder so we can make sure the communications are getting through to you. We really do want to make sure that this is a more equitable conference moving forward, and we hope all of you can continue to join us in this journey. So thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Just a reminder, we will have this session was recorded, and we'll share it with everybody, both the chat conversations and the video recording as well. And we'll follow up with all of the small group facilitators to collect the notes from the discussions and kind of figure out how we can move this conversation forward. So thank you so much to all of you for joining, and we'll see you at some of the other events this week and in April. Thanks.